Good morning. I want to welcome all of you who have come to the great state of Kansas for spring break. I don't think you could find a nicer climate anywhere in the world than right here. So we welcome all of you who've come from Florida to be with us today. It's just so funny. I woke up this morning, the meteorologist people, they're just dramatic by nature, I guess, because I woke up this morning, there were those little red triangles with the emergency, notification. I thought, it's not going to snow. So, and I looked, and it said the weather's going to be in the low 70s with low humidity, so there's a real threat of fire. Is the cup half full or is it half empty? I don't know. So anyways, this morning we return to our series on grace and truth. But before taking you on to the next subject, please allow me just a moment to address at least one concern that has risen from those of you who've been kind enough to write. And this concern was expressed by a gentleman who's following this series in France. And he expressed a concern that he felt that on some level I was oversimplifying complex subjects. And I just want to acknowledge that as a truly valid concern. It really is. I would argue that some degree of simplicity is generally necessary given the confines of a 35-minute sermon and a very diverse group of listeners from ages 5 to 95 and varying degrees of educational background. But nevertheless, it's a valid concern. And I would be rendering you a tremendous disservice if I failed to acknowledge the vast complexity of ideas and issues that surround the concepts that we're talking about, things like truth and epistemology, biblical interpretation, and worldviews. Thousands and thousands of books have been written about these subjects, and I would be an arrogant fool to suggest or lead you to believe that somehow I had mastered them all. I haven't, and I'm not claiming to have a full comprehensive statement or truth claim about all of these things such that you don't need to go do your own reading. You do. I have said publicly, and I'll say again, I'm not right, and neither are you. Right? I mean, we are fallen, limited human beings. I'm constantly learning. I read every day, and I hope you do as well. I'm very appreciative of this young man and his thoughts and insights. I'm very appreciative of all the thinkers across all the different disciplines who challenged me to reconsider my assumptions and the way that I live my life. I mean, I need that in my life, so do you. So listen, if I've come across as though my simple presentation is all there is to say about these subjects, please forgive me. That is certainly not the case. However, in light of all the complexity that is most certainly out there, let me remind you of this simple truth that is universally true for all human beings who currently take in air. And it is this, that assuming that we make it through the night, we will wake up tomorrow morning, we will roll out of bed and put our feet on the ground, and we will immediately begin to make choices. We'll make choices about what we're going to eat for breakfast, what we're going to wear. We're going to make choices if we enter into the workplace or we go to school. We're going to make choices about the tone of voice we use when we address our family members, choices about how we treat people, how we include them or exclude them, how we choose to express anger or love, gentleness or cruelty, fairness or treachery. We'll choose what to read, what to watch, what to view on our computers, what to listen to on our stereos. And all throughout our day tomorrow, there will be some basic assumptions that guide the way that we make those choices. And that underlying basis of assumptions that we either, think about intentionally or not, but I mean, this underlying base of assumptions is if you think in terms of computers, it is your operating system. It is your general worldview. It is the way that you just make decisions. You assume a lot of things are true, and that's how you make the decisions that you make. Now, what we know is how we make decisions greatly determines who we are and who we are becoming, but not just individually, but also affect all the people around us, affects how society is doing and what society is becoming, to the degree that it affects the curriculum that we're going to teach in our public schools. It will affect the decisions of our judicial court systems and the laws that are adopted by Congress. It is no small thing to make a choice. Now, here's the plain situation that we can observe every day around us with no threat of oversimplifying this. I mean, Christianity has something to say about what is true that should then consequently inform the way people make decisions and their behavior, and consequently the way we should teach our children and govern society. But we're not alone with our contribution of something to say. Humanism certainly has something to say about what is true, about how people should behave, what should be taught to our children, and the way our country should be governed, as does atheism and communism and Hinduism and Buddhism and all the isms, right? But this is what's obvious, and that is that we don't all agree. And there are considerable controversies that are dividing our families, our relationships with others, our society in general. So the question is, how do we talk about that? How do we talk about what is true and how to behave, and at the very same time, not get into a big fight or forget that we as Christians anyways are people of grace? So my goal in this series has been to point you to Jesus Christ as the only one who is full of truth and grace, as the one who can actually speak to all cultures and all times and say, this is true north. And that might seem to you overly simplistic, but I would maintain that it is a valid way, actually, to deal with our controversies, to shape our life. And this morning, I'll begin to show you why in more specific ways. In order for us to do that, we have to actually get into some of these controversies. We have to dig a little bit deeper into the particulars. Now, in order to do this, I mean, anyone on my staff could tell you, I have struggled mightily for how to do this. But I'm going to work with an analogy, and that is that your worldview and your basic assumptions creates your house, okay? And there's 4 walls to your house. And these 4 walls are the same for all people. They really are. And this has been written about many, many times for thousands of years. But basically, there's going to be 4 walls, and you're going to have the wall of science, the observable world around us. You're going to have the wall of philosophy, which just tries to make sense of society and how we are and culture in general. And then you're going to have the wall of history, where we learn a great deal based upon what we believe has happened in the past. And we're going to have the wall of theology, which is just the way that we talk about God, okay? These 4 walls are consistent for everybody. And I'm sorry that I don't have a prop, but I just couldn't figure out how to do that without you not being able to see me inside of the walls. But that 4 walls, and if you'll just keep that in your mind, those 4 walls really do, I mean, you may not think about philosophy very much, but you've made some assumptions, some philosophical assumptions, and so on. Now, the roof of your house is kind of the synthesis of all those things, and that's just kind of your brain, right? That's just, you're making decisions based upon these 4 walls and the synthesis of all those things that you believe is true. That's really standard. But here's what I think determines whether or not your house stands or falls, and that is the foundation upon which you build your house. The foundation is that absolute thing that you believe is always true. It really isn't any of the 4 walls. It's what you build the 4 walls on. For example, postmodernism, that kind of says we don't actually believe there's anything absolutely true. That is the foundation, and it is actually an absolute truth claim. And so you're going to build those walls upon this shifting sand of we don't really know that anything can be relied upon. Now, I'd love to take credit for the whole house analogy, but I really can't. I have to give credit where credit's due. Jesus Christ spoke in these languages, gave us this picture, and we're going to read about that, and I'm very excited because we get to read from the Gospel of Luke. Luke 6, verses 46 through 49. And as always, I'm going to ask you to stand for the reading of God's word. This is our text for today. Listen to what Jesus says in regards to the house that we're building. Let's read this out loud together. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke out against that house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. Thank you. Please be seated. So here's what Jesus Christ just said. He said, I'm the rock. He says plainly that in order to build our houses on solid ground, obedience to his teaching will be the only safe foundation. No one else ever made that claim, only Jesus. So the question is Jesus correct? Can he be trusted? Do the four walls of thought, science, philosophy, theology, and history stand firm upon Jesus Christ or not? Is there a better foundation on which we should construct our lives in the way that we view the world? The next 4 messages in this series will explore each of the 4 walls as they relate to Jesus Christ and a biblical worldview. And I cannot possibly speak to all the complexities in these 4 areas, but I want to show you from a 20,000-foot level why I personally find the biblical worldview and Jesus Christ specifically to be a reliable foundation upon which to construct our house, all 4 walls. So this morning, I will begin with the wall of science. Science, in its truest form, is the process of gaining knowledge through observation. Many of us love science. Many of us were raised with a great excitement about all the things that science could reveal to us. I mean, I still remember holding the 2 ends of the wire at 5th grade and being shocked and just thinking, this is so cool, because we were generating electricity on our own. We've all learned the scientific method, right? Identify the problem, gather evidence, you make your hypothesis, you test your hypothesis, you draw a conclusion. These steps of the scientific method have brought great value to our world and to our lives on planet Earth. I'm a big fan of science. I'm not very good at it per se, but I'm very thankful for this incredible discipline of learning. I benefit every day from the immunizations I received as a child. I truly enjoy the benefits of electricity and combustion engines. I marvel constantly at airplanes and air travel. It never ceases to amaze me. I'm ridiculously dependent on my cell phone. We have a lot to be thankful for. A lot of appreciation needs to be expressed to the scientific community for the way that they have really spoken into our lives in terms of health, technology, and so many other ways. As a Christian, I do not feel threatened or at war with the field of science. In fact, I find science to be an incredible encouragement to my faith. And you should know that many scientists feel the same way. In fact, if you actually study the history of science, you would see that the vast majority of scientists throughout history have been deep believers in God. Many have been passionate followers of Jesus Christ. And they will insist that there is no divorce between science and faith. But that does actually depend upon how we define science and then how we use the Bible. First, true science is learning through observation without bias. Okay, that's true science. In other words, a scientist is obliged to strip away bias when observing, gathering evidence, making a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, and drawing a conclusion. And let me give you an example of where bias can come into play. This is just an example, but it's an important one. Most cosmologists, and I would say just most scientists in the large field of general science, would agree with the observation that the universe is expanding and it's slowing down. This is a very common observation. For this reason, it is widely held that the universe had a beginning, right? Because something's expanding and slowing down. The idea is that it once came from some original source. And this is what is the basis for what we call the Big Bang Theory. And the Big Bang Theory is just that there was a time when there was no universe. And then suddenly, about 4.5 billion years ago, something just exploded. Something that was there, something that was not the universe, but some people think it was the size of a golf ball. But that it exploded, and immediately the universe came into being, and all the planets and stars and whatnot were just shooting out at a tremendous speed, such that even scientists, when they talk about the fact that the universe is 4.5 billion years old, will tell you that Earth could only probably be sustained on life 150 million years ago, because up to that point, the Earth was so hot. Why was it hot? Because it was moving at such a tremendous rate of speed. Now, there are all levels of complexity, brother, in France. I get that. And they all come into play when we talk about the beginning of the universe. Lots of people have written about this. But most scientists, if not all of them, would agree that the universe had a beginning, hasn't always been there. So what can we say about that? Well, if we take this scientific observation and we apply it to the wall of our house, our worldview, the way that we're going to bake some assumptions, and we're building that upon the foundation of Jesus Christ and a biblical worldview, well, you see, there's no problem with that. Genesis 1 plainly states, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The biblical worldview, endorsed and taught by Jesus himself, agrees with what science observes. The universe had a beginning. God is responsible for bringing the universe into existence. According to the Bible, God created the universe by speaking it into being. And I suspect that probably was a big bang if there ever was one, right? Boom, and that's the way it looks. Scientifically, that's when we observe it. That's exactly the way it looks. Now, some people will tell you that science cannot talk about God. However, true science cannot apply a predetermined bias before making a hypothesis about that which can be scientifically observed. So we're in the tension now, right? You feel it. Because if all that science can talk about is naturalistic conclusions, naturalistic theories, in other words, a godless science, then there's no reasonable answer for how the universe came into existence. There's just not. This has been a huge problem for natural origins or naturalistic science, and it remains a huge problem for the simple logical rule of causality, which is just this, that anything that has a beginning has a cause. Everyone agrees the universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause, right? Something that has a beginning cannot cause itself to exist. Something must bring it into existence. Something must cause it to exist. Now, there are a lot of theories regarding the origin of life and how the universe came into existence, but my point is simply this: Jesus and the biblical witness align with what science observes. There's no conflict in this regard unless we errantly assume that science must exclude any notion of God or supernatural causes from its conclusion. But one could argue that that is an irrational assumption. It is an unreasonable bias. The wall of science stands firmly upon the foundation of Jesus and a biblical worldview. Let's talk about DNA for a second. Ask any scientist to just describe DNA to you, and they'll get a big smile on their face, and they'll actually wax poetic because it's awesome. I mean, if you've actually studied anything about DNA, it's just one of the most remarkable, observable, powerful, intricate, complex little bits of mastery that the world has ever seen. Francis Collins, the esteemed microbiologist credited for mapping the human genome, refers to DNA as the language of God in the book by the same title. Biochemist Michael Denton writes, a single teaspoon of DNA could store all of the genetic information for every species that has ever lived, and it would still have room for the information contained in every book ever written. This is vastly superior to modern computer hard drives, and such a system, or one like it with similar functions, would need to be in place for evolution to get off the ground. So, does the remarkable genius of DNA line up with a biblical worldview as held to and taught by Jesus Christ? Well, sure it does. There are so many beautiful passages that speak to this. One of my favorite Psalms is the 139th Psalm, where David writes, "You formed me in my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." Again, there are myriads of theories regarding human evolution through natural causes, but I'm simply pointing to you the simple fact there's no conflict with the scientific observation regarding the intricate, inexplicable, dazzling qualities of DNA and the biblical worldview that God is just that brilliant of a creator, such that we find his fingerprints on all the beautiful intricacies of our bodies and all of creation for that matter. Now, if science attempts to account for the incredible complexity and brilliance of DNA without any reference to God or in that field, intelligent design, you see, then we're walking around and we must construct this wall of science upon a different foundation. We must construct it upon a foundation that has no room for God, just naturalistic causes. But it creates a really, really big problem. We must account now for how something so incredibly complex, specific, and intricate could somehow form itself out of chaos through the simple formula of time and chance before evolution could get off the ground. And we must draw those conclusions in spite of scientific observations, such as the second law of thermodynamics, which says that all things in a fixed system move towards entropy. That's just a fancy way of saying that things tend to break down, not break up. And I'm 44 years old, and I can bear witness to that. A lot of you can too, better than I can, apparently. All right. It's a real problem. And then you have brilliant scientists who are trying so hard to come with a possible loophole to the law of thermodynamics, come up with a possible loophole to how a universe could suddenly just pop into being. But you have to understand that even with the DNA, the random development of DNA, this concept that it just happened over time and space, must assume exactly the opposite of the law of thermodynamics, that somehow in spite of that, DNA formed itself and became increasingly complex as to account for the evolution of man. Now, trust me, these are complex and difficult conversations, and there are many theories. But rest assured that the wall of science, based upon the foundation of complete naturalistic causes, is definitely the epitome of shifting sand. It just is. Anything that was written in the 80s, any person in that realm will just tell you, well, we don't even think that's true anymore because there have been all these new discoveries. Well, that wasn't that long ago. In fact, anything that you really thought was the gospel truth about the naturalistic sciences that was written 6 months ago could easily be summarily dismissed by a large group of scientists because of something new that they found. And so you will find that you're constantly on shifting sand. Rest assured, you will build one wall of your house around this field of science. You're thinking, I didn't come to church to get a science lesson. Why are we talking about this? Is it really that important? Oh, it's a big deal. You see, because if you get into conversations with many people in our culture today, they literally will say to you, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. Which is to say that science is now the authority by which I inform my life. Science is not just a wall, it's the foundation. And it's not science with God as a possibility, it's naturalistic science. And it will then inform decisions about having an abortion. Why? Because it's just a blob of cells. It's not really a person. We don't really talk about any moral value in that. It's just a blob of cells. We'll just have an abortion. We're just going to walk away from God. God's been rendered unnecessary because science has answered all of our questions. And they will then justify teaching our children based upon their perception of naturalistic science that, will justify what is now the Common Core curriculum within the public schools in most of our states that teaches Darwinian evolution as though it's a done deal with the implied message that humanity arose from natural origins through time and chance. Atheist scientists, such as Richard Dawkins, will insist that a materialist worldview is the only rational way to make sense of the science. But is that what science actually says? No, not at all. In fact, many scientists have been very critical of Dawkins and other atheists who arrogantly claim the findings of science as their unique ammunition to dismantle and discredit a biblical worldview. The esteemed microbiologist and Jesus follower, Dr. Francis Collins writes, of all the possible worldviews, atheism is the least rational. He's a scientist, and he's one of thousands who would hold to that perspective. Honest science is very self-critiquing, very willing to admit that all of the naturalistic explanations for macroevolution or natural origins have a huge amount of problems and ongoing dispute within the scientific community. They're very critical of each other. There are many, many disagreements and arguments about all of that. And yet, our Common Core curriculum teaches it as though it's just a done deal and everybody knows it. Many, many esteemed scientists around the world believe in God. Many of them follow Jesus Christ. Many of them would tell you there's not a divorce between science and faith. But a lot of people have their perception that this is a done deal and they've moved on, and that's why we must engage in the conversation. Now, let me turn my critique to myself and the Christian camp for just a minute. To be fair, this has been true throughout the past 2,000 years. I mean, to be fair, many of the rifts, the perceived divorce between science and faith, have been fueled by Christians. For example, many Christians insist that Genesis 1 and 2 provide a full, comprehensive explanation regarding creation and the origin of life, such that science really has nothing to add or to contribute to that conversation. That is a terrible mistake. What God reveals in Genesis regarding the creation is absolutely sufficient for us to know that the existence of the universe and the complexity of life on planet Earth is God's doing, not the result of accidental time and chance. And that clear truth found in God's word actually affirms exactly what we see and observe through the discipline of science and the complex design of DNA in a universe that has not always existed. But we should not think, nor should we start a fight with the assumption that the Genesis account of creation is comprehensive in scope. My kids asked me about this the other day, and I said, if God wanted to be published on the intricacies of his work in creating the universe and even the complexity of life on earth, it would take up every library on the planet. We get just a few words, just a few verses. That is clearly, the Bible is not interested in describing the specifics of how or when in regards to creation and the development of life on earth. It is far more concerned about the who and very quickly, and then what went wrong. And what is God going to do about that, and what has God done about it? That is this narrative of the Bible. It is not interested in providing a comprehensive answer to the how and when of creation. And so, we end up in a fight over the age of the earth because some Christians want to hold so strongly that the earth is 6,000 years old, and we hang our hat on that such that if science proves that the earth is actually a few million years old, then our faith is shattered, and we don't know what to believe about the authority of the Bible. Listen, the Bible doesn't say how old the earth is. The Bible says with absolute clarity, God created the heavens and the earth. Let's not create a fight where there doesn't need to be one. Now, at the same time, we generally have grown to a point where we're distrusting of science, and we send out a message of fear, as though we're afraid of what science might find out that somehow tips over the house of cards, which is our fragile faith. Let me tell you something. We are not afraid of truth ever, of any kind of truth, in any of the disciplines. If Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, then all truth points to him. That is either the case or it's not. But I will tell you that we are not afraid of what scientists discover as true. Truth is not afraid of truth. Now, let me also just turn my critique back to the field of science. With all humility, I understand that I'm not a scientist, but listen. Science, as I understand it, should not be quick to jettison the very real possibility that God is there and that God is responsible for the many amazing discoveries that are being made about the universe and DNA and the development of life on Earth. You know, when a biochemist, and I've read a lot on this subject, but when biochemists point to DNA and they shrug and simply say, blind luck, the intellectual poverty of that statement betrays a bias against a very reasonable alternative answer, which is simply that God is there and God is brilliant. Science should remain open to all possibilities and draw conclusions based upon what observable data actually suggest. And when we look at a universe that suddenly comes into being 4.5 billion years ago, and when we look at the complexity and intricacy of DNA, many scientists will say the only reasonable explanation is that there's a God and he's brilliant. And there's many, many more things I could say about all of the evidence that points to that conclusion. But I will acknowledge this is complex, it's hard stuff, and I know that we've only touched the tip of the iceberg, but we must engage in the conversation. Because rest assured, a great many assumptions have been made, and much of our society is just moving on as though it's a done deal. It's not. But let's not be at war with science. We all care about science. We all need what science has to teach us. We must not accept the lie that faith and science are mutually exclusive or somehow by definition at odds with each other. That's a fallacy. And I've tried to show you that the wall of science in your house can rest very firmly and solidly upon a biblical worldview. Now, I want to close by taking you back to our text today in Luke 6. Jesus, as the author and perfecter of life, the one who can speak absolute truth into our lives, here's what he said. He said, no matter where your faith is right now, the place to start is to do what he said. That's what he said. He didn't ask us to agree with him intellectually. He said, go do it. Put my teachings into practice. That will be the foundation for your house. Doing what Jesus commanded is the foundation, not intellectually agreeing with him. And I know that might sound like hair splitting, but it's not. There's a certain amount of learning that can only take place when we're in the process of doing something. So my first charge and challenge to you, wherever you are in your faith, is to go and study what Jesus said and then put that into practice and see what truth might open up for you in the simple obedience of obeying the one who is the very center of history and the one who speaks with such authority. The second thing that Jesus says as he paints this picture of the obedient man is that this is one who digs deep. I find that far too often we are all just generally lazy when it comes to the way that we think. We don't like to dig deep. We like to drink the little cultural Kool-Aid that's being passed around on a tray because we want to believe that the person who's made the Kool-Aid, who's passing it around, has done their homework. That's a terrible idea. And whether we're talking about 1950s socialized Christianity, which came around on a tray, said just drink it, everyone goes to church, it doesn't matter, just whatever denomination flips your bill, but everyone goes to church, everyone's a Christian, just drink the Kool-Aid. Or whether we're talking about 2015 postmodern Kool-Aid that just says, this has all been figured out. Science already knows. It's humanism. It's a post-Christian thing. Just drink the Kool-Aid. Don't drink Kool-Aid, okay? Dig deep. Dig deep into what Jesus actually said. Dig deep into what science actually says. There's a lot to learn, and I don't think that any real truth, any real strong walls are built upon just drinking cultural Kool-Aid and not giving it much thought. And there's a reason that we dig deep. And this is the last thing that Jesus says. He says, a storm is coming, and it will absolutely test your house. This is not optional, and this is not oversimplistic. This is just human life, right? The storm's coming. Cancer diagnosis, death of a child, unemployment, bankruptcy, foreclosure. There's just a thousand ways that storm is going to come, and it's going to bash against your house. The question is, will your house stand? Here's what Jesus said. Do as I command, and your house will stand. Will you pray with me? Lord, I pray that we will dig deep, because the world all around us needs a thoughtful, reasonable, compassionate response to the conversation that rages all around us. And Lord, we are sinners. We see dimly now. And so we all, in all humility, recognize that we probably don't have it all right. But you stand out in history as the one who made such profound claims about yourself, about your teaching, about what is true. And I pray that we will look to you, that we will read what you have to say, that we will think deeply about these things, that we will doubt our doubts, that we will actually examine the foundation upon which we have built our house, why we make the decisions that we make, why we believe what we believe, that we will hold to the same standard, all foundations. And I pray that we might find that this truth of which you have spoken, obedience to your word, digging deep, trusting you, building our walls, building our house, building our worldview around you, I pray that we'll find that when the storm comes, it stands, that we might bear witness to that with humility and confidence. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.